That sounds like it's working. You all hear me okay? Welcome. I'm Victor Curran. Welcome on behalf of the Transcendentalism Council of First Parish in Concord and our co-sponsors, the Women's Parish Association. For over 15 years, the Transcendentalism Council has put on programs like this that celebrate the women and men whose vision and courage made Concord the home of American independence and imagination. And we have a good time planning and putting on these events. But we're always open to new ideas and new energy. So if you'd like to find out about becoming part of the Transcendentalism Council, please see me or Shelley Hawks with her hand up over there at the reception downstairs after the lecture, and we'll be happy to let you in on the secrets. This evening, we are delighted to welcome Kate Culkin. She is from New York, but we consider her an honorary Concordian. She is professor of history at Bronx Community College of the City University of New York. She is the author of Harriet Hosmer, A Cultural Biography. The sculptor Harriet Hosmer was not one of the Concord Hosmers. She was a Watertown Hosmer. What brings Kate here tonight, though, is her new book, Emerson's Daughters, Ellen Tucker Emerson, Edith Emerson Forbes, and Their Family Legacy. More specifically, the older daughter, Ellen. Ellen played an indispensable role in the life of her family, in the town of Concord, and here at First Parish. Her father, Ralph Waldo Emerson, cast a long shadow, but tonight, Kate will give Ellen her turn in the spotlight. There will be time for Q&A. If you are here in the sanctuary, please wait to get a microphone before you ask your question. That way the people watching us on Zoom can hear the question. If you are one of the people watching us here on Zoom and you have a question, put it in the chat and we will see it that way. After the lecture, there is going to be a reception downstairs in the parish hall, and which is through that door. And there will be refreshments, and there will be books for sale and signing courtesy of the Thoreau Society Bookshop at Walden Pond. We do a lot of these things. Please follow the Transcendentalism Council on Facebook for announcements of upcoming events. Next up is going to be Concord historian Richard Smith, who many of you know. He will be here in April talking about the Hoare family here, who were in the 19th century known as Concord's royal family. So we don't have a date for that, but we will be announcing it very soon. So now, please join me in welcoming Kate Culkin.
This down a little bit. Can everybody hear me? Okay, thank you. Great. So first I want to thank the Transcendentalism Council of First Parish and the Women's Parish Association for having me, and special thanks to Shelley Hawks and Victor Curran for all their work in arranging this event. And also to Shelley and to James Sherblum, who took a morning to speak to me while I was finishing my book, to talk to me about Ellen and First Parish. And as always, thank you to Anka Voss and Jesse Hopper at the William Monroe Special Collections at the Concord Free Public Library, who helped me navigate the vast parish records, among many other acts of assistance and kindness. And could I have that first slide? Okay. And these are just two pictures of Ellen at different stages of her life. So on February 24th, 1870, Ellen Tucker Emerson turned 31 in Milton, Massachusetts. She was staying with her sister, Edith Emerson Forbes, sent to rest and recover from one of the occasional collapses she had due to a sort of mysterious combination of mental and physical exhaustion. It was unusual for her to be away from Concord and the Emerson home, where she cared for her aging parents and was immersed in the community of the town and of this parish. The Emersons loved honoring and celebrating birthdays, and Ellen's mother, Lydian, sent her a letter to make sure she knew that her daughter was in her thoughts. Father says, "Tell her we rejoice in her existence and wish her to do her best to prolong it," Lydian wrote. She added, "He thinks you might banish or vanquish your ails by taking ale, and he wishes he had thought in season to send you for your birthday present a dozen of the choicest brand." And Ellen had signed a temperance pledge. So Mother joins in these good wishes and correct sentiments. So it wasn't the only times Ellen's commitment to temperance came up during her stay in Milton. At a dinner party, a visitor expressed surprise that Ellen had signed a temperance pledge. Edith, in turn, burst out, "She went and signed it 3 years ago, and she's been running downhill ever since." Edith was a little taken aback herself by the force of her reaction, even as the whole table laughed and shook for a long time, including Ellen. So now this talk is advertised. We'll mainly focus on Ellen's faith and her relationship to First Parish and Unitarianism. But I wanted to open with this anecdote, not only to honor Ellen's birthday, which was earlier this week, 2 days ago, but also because I think there is a connection between Ellen signing the temperance pledge and the way her faith manifested. In both cases, she made choices that might seem, from our 21st century perspective, conservative, perhaps even reactionary in some cases, particularly given the circle in which she was raised and circulated. And while I think these choices are, to some extent, evidence of her conservative approach to certain issues, particularly women's roles, and she was also anti-suffrage, firmly anti-suffrage, but they are also a sign of her independence. Ellen has often been depicted, as Joseph Thomas described her, as a somewhat belated example of what historians call the cult of true womanhood, who was an editorial angel in the house. But even though Ellen was devoted to caring for her family and drew much of her self-worth and identity from her work as a caregiver, and did in fact love the poem, The Angel in the House, and read it throughout her life, she was much more complex than this depiction indicates. Ashley Reed, a scholar in 19th century religious writing by women, has argued, critics of women's writings often take for granted that religion can only serve as an oppressive force in women's lives, rather than a matter of personal choice, an aspect of communal belonging, a vehicle for intellection and self-expression, and a sincere apprehension of the nature of the universe and human existence. Unitarianism and her connection to First Parish served as all of those things for Ellen. In fact, in a memorial sermon delivered in this very building for Ellen, Lauren McDowell suggested that Ellen's choices actually made her the perfect embodiment of her father's famous ideas about individualism. He wrote, "She followed him," Ralph Waldo Emerson, "in being eminently true to her own nature, frankly loyal to her own thought, even when it led her to differ from the views of him who she loved and honored, her father." So First Parish was at the heart of Ellen's religious life. She'd always attended, and she began attending Bible school with the minister Grinnell Reynolds around 1864, and decided to formally join the church in January 1867. The documentation of her thinking about this decision appears in a letter to her cousin Haven Emerson, the son of her Uncle William, who lived in New York City, and who was one of her closest friends. He was just a year younger than her. Ellen told Haven, "I wish I could say that I had come so far that I was joining the church as I have always hoped to join it. No, I do it because I have been taught that it is not the fold of the redeemed, as I supposed, but the Christian school, and to join it is to declare simply that you desire to be a Christian. In that case, I belong there, and see no objection to entering." She noted that her mother is glad to hear it, though she could never see her own clear way to doing it. And her father was surprised and says he should feel as if it abridged his own boundless freedom if it were himself, but if I feel no difficulty, then there is none. Ellen also told Haven, "It gives me access indeed to the communion table," a perhaps telling detail. Her father had famously left his position as a minister at Boston's Second Church because of his lack of belief in communion. Now his daughter embraced the ritual. And the timing of Ellen's decision is significant. And can I have the next slide? And this is Edith with several of her children. Her sister Edith, her closest friend and partner in caregiving and housekeeping, had married William Forbes in October 1865 and moved to Milton, Massachusetts. And she had her first child, Ralph, in July 1866. She stayed and would always stay close to her birth family, but Edith clearly had a life independent of Bush, the Emerson home. Over the 1866 Thanksgiving, there had been some tension between the sisters when Edith felt like Ellen was giving too much attention to her Sunday school students. She complained to their brother Edward the torment of Ellen being such a one-ideaed creature, continuing, if her own health, mother's, and mine all depended on her care, Sunday schoolers and Bible study would still reign preeminent over all her days and hours. It makes me so mad, which I think is kind of a younger sister comment. But I think it's notable that in less than 2 months, Ellen, who usually was so focused on caregiving and tending to her family's needs and wants, had not only not stepped away, but was formalizing her commitment. Like her commitment to temperance, it was a way in which she carved out a space for herself and in a very socially acceptable way resisted or even rebelled. Now, as Edith's frustration underscores, Ellen was a dedicated Sunday school teacher. She took this duty seriously, planning careful lessons that would engage the students and encourage them to think through the material with which she presented them. In 1863, for instance, she reported, "I undertook to prepare my children's minds for Christmas. They once learned calm on the listening ear of night. I told them to review it, read it aloud, and ask them what it was about." In 1867, she participated in a conversation at the Sunday school teachers' meeting about how much classes should focus on teaching doctrine. She argued they should focus on it more, but she felt she herself was not sufficiently grounded to do so. She consulted with Reynolds, to whom she explained she could not answer student questions about why Jesus died and what was meant by the blood of Christ. And he encouraged her to explore the questions of doctrine herself and arrive at her own answers. She reported these events to her father, who was on a lecture tour. He praised the report, noting the letter was excellent, and said, "I must read it again." And then 6 days later, he wrote, "Your letter of the Sunday school meeting was charming and did high honor to all parties." And the Emersons were very serious about their correspondence. So to get a compliment about a letter you wrote was the highest praise. And they would criticize each other's letters quite a bit as well, including Ellen and Edith being very critical of their father's letters. They didn't hold back. So can I have the next slide as well? So the William Monroe collection at the Concord Public Library and the parish collections hold some of Ellen's lessons plans for her Sunday school from the 1890s. So over 30 years after she taught the students about Christmas, she used similar techniques of asking students to read passages or look carefully at images and discuss what they found. And if there's any fellow teachers in the room, and I know there are at least a few, they may recognize these techniques, ways in which we encourage students to engage with a text and move beyond lectures and rote memorization. And I admit, when I saw these lessons in the Special Collections reading room, I felt closer to Ellen than I often did. It was a time I really felt like I understood her and her thinking, and seeing that she used strategies in a very different atmosphere, but they were very similar to the strategies I use in my classrooms. So Ellen's long tenure as a Sunday school teacher meant she influenced generations of Concordians, and they did not forget her. In June 1902, she hosted a gathering of her first students, who are by now in their 50s. They passed around a 3-volume edition of the work of George Herbert, a 17th century English religious poet, which they had given her as a gift. And they discussed the poems they remembered from her class 4 decades earlier. "You can imagine how interesting it was to me," Ellen noted with pride to Edith. So beginning in 1881, the Women's Parish Association provided Ellen another way to contribute to the community. And can I have the next slide? I'm just going to take a drink. So Ellen's signature appears first on the list of founding members, and she was active in the association for the rest of her life. Its aims included encouraging the organized work of women for the various objects needing their help. While some women protested that the association was stepping into men's territory, Ellen was not one of them. As with her role on the school committee, to which she was the first woman elected, Ellen justified this public work as falling within women's sphere of faith and caregiving, even if it was technically outside of the home. And in that way, it was sort of combined with not shaking her anti-suffrage stance. She could do this work and still be against suffrage. And she was, in fact, excited when the anti-suffragist Kate Garnett Wells spoke to the Women's Paris Association in 1886, telling Edith she would not invite her because she knew Edith disapproved. And suffrage is an issue that the sisters squabble over from time to time. The monthly association meetings often included a talk or reading of a tract by a member. While elsewhere Ellen expressed concern about women speaking in public, she obviously did not consider this activity that type of public speaking. She presented regularly, including reading a temperance tract in 1886 and giving a talk on religious education of children in 1887. Edith read one of Ellen's papers, and I think it's the one on the religious education of children, but it's a little unclear, to the women of her parish in Milton at the end of 1886. She reported that afterwards the audience crowded around me with thanks and messages of thanks to you, and then she added, "I think it a very beautiful and wise paper, and I am proud of it." In 1896, Ellen returned from a trip to Europe, which kept her from Concord for over a year, and during which she studied world history one summer at Oxford. And so when she returned, she gave a talk listed as her European trip with 100% of the members in attendance. And we all know how hard it is to get 100% of a committee to appear. And so I think that's just a sign of how much she was missed and how much she was respected within the parish and within the town. Like her Sunday school lessons, these presentations illuminate the ways in which the parish was an intellectual outlet for Ellen, along with the role it played in her religious and social life, and the ways those different elements of her lives intertwined. And unfortunately, I haven't found any of those talks, like the manuscript for any of those talks. The Emerson saved so much, and as Uncle knows, they are still bringing things in. So I have hope that they are somewhere, that those talks will appear. But that's one thing. It seems very out of character for them not to be saved, so I think they might be somewhere. So Ellen's commitment to Unitarianism and Sunday school went beyond the borders of Concord. In 1878, for instance, she was elected as a delegate to the National Sunday School Convention that was held that year in Saratoga Springs. Her father came with her for the final days of the event, and Ellen delighted in disabusing people of the belief that it was Waldo who was the delegate, which had been erroneously reported in a newspaper. "You can understand the pleasure I had in improving the opportunity offered me almost hourly of denying the truth of this sentiment," she reported to Edith. But more important is Ellen's description in the same letter of what it meant for her to attend the conference. She lays it out in detail to Edith, aware that her sister would likely not understand intuitively how these type of events fed Ellen spiritually, socially, and intellectually. The joys of Saratoga, socially and intellectually, were all that had been promised. To dwell in a fairy place, in the best and gleefulest of company, to see every friend lay or clerical from every part of the world that you almost ever had, raises one's spirits continually. That I don't know what your ideas of convictions are. I imagine you think of them like after-dinner speeches, wearisome, but work isn't wearisome, and conventions mean work, and work enlivened by the gayest play. The essays are so fine you feel proud of your race, the business is carried on like a game, and life is so exciting and full that a day seems like a week. And she often just uses the word joy in describing these conventions, Unitarian conventions, Sunday school conventions. Once she runs into her friends on the train platform, and they're all going together, and she's like, there's nothing like the joy of a group of people on the way to a Unitarian convention. Now, I quoted this letter at length because it illuminates, again, this multi-factor role that these events played in Ellen's life. But I also think her need to explain it to Edith suggests she wanted to protect the time she spent on these endeavors, show the worth of it, and push back against her siblings' resistance to them. So she said she knew Edith would think like, oh, this is just like a boring after-dinner speech at like a banquet. And Edward had joked about the speakers at a convention that was held here in April '76, noting that their motto should be, "Men may come and men may go, but I go on forever." So they had different ideas about these events. So in this letter, in which she lays out the reasons the conferences are so important to her sister, were also important to me as a biographer. I have to say, I'm not sure I would have considered how enriching these type of activities could be to her if she hadn't told me. So Ellen sort of became more involved in doctrinal debates about Unitarianism and the direction it should go through attending these conferences. And this became a matter of particular concern in 1881 when her beloved Grindel Reynolds was appointed secretary of the Unitarian Association and First Parish needed to select a new minister. In a letter to her friend Clara Dabney, she reflected, "I find my expectations are not high. It does not seem as if there are any young ministers in the denomination who are Christians, and how can I like to receive a minister of the modern kind who is distinctly persuaded that Christ was a man, only a man, and that as two ministers have said to me, he was valuable to the human race exactly as Washington was, as a moral example. For a long time, I had great hopes for the Unitarians. The tide I had turned, I felt, and they were becoming more Christian. But since I have learned how they have become more Christian, I am only pained by their preaching. At least they have learned to study the Gospels and own in Christ their best example and teacher, and to confess it plainly. And that is something to be thankful for. And for a long time, while I regarded it as a stage. I enjoyed it, but now the older men, almost without exception, have settled into the same place. And I seem to see that even if it is only a stage, it is one that is likely to last these many years." Now, it's significant that Ellen wrote this to Dabney, of all people, who was part of the family she had befriended in the Azores. We have an Azorean here. And when she traveled there in 1868, where Dabney's father was U.S. Consul. Dabney and Ellen were both elder daughters who served as caregivers for their families and shared a deep and I think similar faith. So it's in these exchanges that Ellen reveals much of her religious thinking in a way that is less defensive in the way she's explaining it to her siblings. Ellen did not stop with laying out her concerns about contemporary ministers. She reflected on the question which her concerns begged her to ask. Of course, the first thing that occurs is, if the Unitarians don't please me, why stay with them? She answers herself, because I belong to them. I cannot find another home. In every other church, the whole atmosphere and the methods are strange and seem less healthy and slight. I must stay where I belong and hope the new light the Unitarians need, and that not I alone, but most people I hear talk feel the need of, will shine in my day. Now, I do want to say she did end up liking the person they hired, Benjamin, and I hope I'm saying his name right because I just realized I've never said it out loud, Bulkley. Am I pronouncing that right? Okay. I've seen it in so many Emerson names, but I have not said it aloud. So he was still in divinity school when he was a candidate, but he was Ellen's first choice. She did note that he was minute, with feet smaller than mine. But when he preached, there was a real voice of prayer that I had hardly heard in my life. It stilled and lifted me at once. When he started, he was engaged but not yet married, and he lived with Ellen and Lydian. And this was literally just months after Waldo's death. And his companionship was a great help as they adjusted to this new stage of their lives. My Bulkley seems more and more a member of the family, brings things to read to us, takes pain about Mother's dinner, and tells us his plans, she reported to her sister. And he also took place in the rousing hymn sing-alongs that they had at the house routinely, along with sort of other people in their circle. As Ellen's sentiment makes clear, she felt strongly tied to the Unitarian Church, largely through First Parish, even as she had concerns about it. But she also did harbor a great curiosity about the faith traditions of other people. This curiosity first began to manifest when she went to the Sedgwick School, located in Lenox, Massachusetts, in the fall of 1853. And because Elizabeth Sedgwick rotated the students through the different churches in the area, so they would go as a group to a different church each Sunday. And they also went to visit the Shakers, which Ellen was fascinated by. And she describes all of these in letters to her mother, who, they have this sort of active, engaged dialogue about religion and different preachers and different meanings. So seeing the preachers, the Shakers, she said, they stood with their faces in the middle of the room while they say a hymn, and a little old lady with her arms spread far out on each side and her eyes shut whirled from one end of the room to the other many times so fast she seems to have arms on all sides like the spokes of a wheel. She was more judgmental of a Presbyterian minister, complaining, "I cannot have confidence in what he says, nor take the most of it for truth. And besides, being a Presbyterian, his doctrines are so different from what I have always been taught to believe that I dislike him still more. And feeling so, will it do me any good to try and listen to him?" She did become sort of more curious as time went on, and as throughout her life, wherever she travels, she's very interested in going to a church and sort of thinking about, reporting on the minister and sort of analyzing, analyzing the sermon. And I feel this actually was very helpful to her when she went to edit her father's essays later in her life. Like that process of analyzing text in that way, I think, was a good background. And so her trip to Europe and Egypt with her father in 1872 and 1873 exposed her, of course, to even more faith traditions. And can I have the next slide? This begins even on the ship, where passengers included Methodist, Baptist, and Presbyterian missionaries headed to India, a Quaker missionary heading to the south of France, the editor of the Congregationalist, Walter Scott Alexander, who was a Presbyterian minister sent to establish Protestantism in Italy, and in Ellen's words, a young Mormon woman from Utah going home to England for a visit. She had long talks with many of these shipmates, for instance, discussing Hindu hymns with Mrs. Brown, one of the missionaries. For their part, Edith and Lydian, who were back home, laughed when reading of this assemblage, with Edith writing, "How desperately funny was your ship's company, evidently convened for your sole benefit. For who else in the world would not have been daunted by such a set? You upholding the Unitarian, father the radical. We trust the German was Lutheran and the Austrian Catholic, that no church should be neglected." And then throughout her trip, Edith is most interested not in museums, but in visiting churches. At London's Temple Church, built for the Knights of the Templar in the 12th century, she reported she didn't understand a word of the chanted service, but she sat next to a saint who really loved the service and faithfully and affectionately took care of me from beginning to end. She loved, in Paris, the Chapelle Evangélique de l'Étoile, finding the sermon on the life of Jeremiah's servant a revelation to me of a Bible history I had not understood before. And she felt the minister was quite as broad as a Unitarian, always prays for and speaks of the great church universal, embracing all sects. In Egypt, she attended a service at a Coptic church in Luxor, and this is an illustration from one of her letters of the Coptic church. And she reported, I came away very much puzzled, of course disagreeably impressed by a part of it, but delighted with the prominent share of the children in the service, and knowing very well that I had been in a church. That was good, and most of all, curious to know something about it. And that sort of curiosity goes through her life in terms of religion and just in terms of other people. Ellen is very curious about other people. Now, I don't want to paint a picture of her as too open-minded, and some of those comments already, you can see that. She was deeply troubled by the Catholicism of Lily Ward von Hoffman, and she is the daughter of Anne Barker and Samuel Ward. When she visits her in Rome, she fears that Lily is trying to convert her. And she noted it went to her heart to see Lily tremble, and her hands go cold when she talked to me, and I meanwhile sitting motionless under my shield, in attitude that seemed heartless. Meanwhile, Edith is in sort of this ongoing fear that Ellen might convert to Catholicism. It's an ongoing fear. But Ellen did respect others' choices, even when they rejected religion. She was disturbed that her Uncle William's funeral, held right here, or the earlier version of this church, Mr. Reynolds included the religious service, for it jarred very much on all the minds that knew that neither Uncle William nor Haven nor Charles, his sons, believed in it. So she was not a proselytizer. She really was curious about other people, respected their religion, but was also quite sure she was on the right path. Now, while she traveled the world, it was, as Ellen told Dabney, Unitarianism that was her home, and for her, that meant First Parish. So the fire that tore through the building in April 1900 hit her very hard, and of course even harder because, of course, her physical home, her family home, had also burned several decades earlier. But that night, Ellen at first ignored the fire bells, which she heard vaguely, thought them surprising, but she thought, I'm too old to run to fires, and went back to sleep. When she awoke at 4:30 in the morning and could see a glow outside, she went to the window in her mother's room. I thought I ought to see a church, but didn't. She raced from window to window and finally went outside. No golden head, nothing but humble tree tops on the horizon. It was inconceivable. It was too true. Someone who had been right at the church said that the moment the belfry bowed itself to fall, the bell gave one last final stroke. It seemed like the death cry of a living creature, bitter to hear, and then came the frightful crash. Before the first meeting about rebuilding the church, two of her Cambridge friends filled Ellen with fear about the endless wrangling and fights their parish was facing in building a new church, and warned her of woeful times. So Ellen was very relieved that when the town hall was full, and it was a very affectionate meeting, every single vote was unanimous as it was decided to rebuild the church largely on the same plan. And assured me that that happened. So Ellen died on January 14th. Oh, and actually, yeah, I think we're on the right slide. Okay. Ellen died on January 14th, 1909, 5 weeks before her 70th birthday. She was at Edith's house in Milton, where she'd had sort of a illness of several months. But in Concord First Parish, the bell tolled 69 times to announce her death, reviving an old tradition of a favorite daughter. The town may truly mourn. She was an influence and a presence such as will never be there again, Edith reflected. Her funeral was, of course, held here on Sunday, January 17th. Despite hail and snow, so we can probably really picture what it was like, mourners filled a special car from Boston, and Concord folks marched through the storm to fill the church. Her niece, Violet, draped her body in a shroud so beautifully that she looked like a statue of a holy saint, according to Edith. And her nephews served as pallbearers, carrying the coffin covered with flowers sent by friends, and Ellen's pew was filled with white roses. Lauren MacDonald, the Concord minister since 1895, led the service. Edward and Edith made it a keynote of the day that Ellen's death should not be mourned. Though it was a sad breakup and loss for them, Edith reminded people that it would have been sadder yet to have her suffer old age or an invalid life. And I'm sure they are thinking of their father when they think of that in his long decline. And could I have the next slide? Oh, yep, there we are. Okay, you're ahead of me. So First Parish played two roles in Ellen's immediate legacy. One was through the booklet that included the memorial sermon, a brief biography of Ellen, and readings from her funeral, which the Women's Parish Association planned with Edith and Edward. In the memorial sermon, MacDonald declared, I like to think of her in whose dear memory we are gathered here today as our epistle, the word for which this church and its ministry stand, written not within or in tablets of stone, but in the fleshly tables of the heart, which the word of God found a sweet and beautiful embodiment. Now, there are two versions of the booklet because of a squabble between Edith and the Women's Parish Association. Edith wanted the biographical sketch written by Elizabeth Horstor published first, and the Parish Association did not feel the sermon should take a subordinate place in the pamphlet, as it was the basis for which they agreed to pay for printing 600 copies, which is like a large number of copies of a memorial pamphlet. So they couldn't come to an agreement, and so there's two versions of the pamphlet, depending if you get one that the Forbes distributed or the one that the parish distributed. The second element was a bequest that Ellen gave to the parish's committee on domestic charities. She left first $2,500, and she bumped it up to $3,500 before she died, to fund an annual gift to a daughter or daughters who, living at home, are supporting parents in straitened circumstances. She asked that the donation go to the same woman each year until her parents died, then be given to another family. The money, she hoped, would save them from corroding anxiety. And I think she understood. She was a caregiver, and she knew how hard that was, but she also knew that, like, her father's fame, her brother-in-law's wealth, made that a much easier path for her. When her parents died, she was able to stay in the family home. It wasn't, but she was very concerned about the lives of single women, and particularly single women who were caregiving. And she wanted to ease their burden as her bequest. And I think it's significant she put that through the church. I mean, there were other ways she could have distributed that money. So I just want to conclude, and can I have the final slide? And these are just two pictures that don't relate to the story, but one, she is with Ellen Tucker Emerson III, her Edward's niece. And then the second one, it says on the back, it's a still from a movie taken at Walden Pond in 1905. So that's, it might be a little hard to see, but that's Walden Pond in the background. So I just want to conclude with another birthday story. On her 60th birthday in 1899, Ellen planned to celebrate with a quiet tea at Edward's house, but her circle of friends planned a surprise party, what Ellen called a fine ovation. The road, according to Ellen's nephew, William Emerson, was black all afternoon with those making the pilgrimage to celebrate one of Concord's favorite daughters, as visitors poured into Bush bearing gifts and treats and flowers, with Ellen's Sunday scholars bringing carnations. Edith's rheumatic knee kept her in Milton, but she sent glass tumblers, a begonia, and a magnificent cake covered with soft frosting suited to the capacities of the aged, and set off with my favorite almonds in number agreeing with my years. Which, that sounds like a good cake. The enclosed note offered congratulations to myself and your family that 60 years of so dear a sister have been granted us. The usually self-effacing Ellen reported, I was delighted by all. So, thank you.
Will you take questions?
Sure, yes.
Will you give questions?
Uh-huh.
So given what seems to be Ellen's conservatism, I wonder what she would think of our current women minister at First Parish today. But I'm wondering if you could comment more about that, because it seems like she was conservative theologically and conservative socially, being anti-suffrage. And was that out of step with other Unitarians in that period? I always associate Unitarians with being progressive and in favor of reform, but it seems like she was not in step with that.
Yeah, I do. Ellen has complicated politics because she's an abolitionist and she's an anti-imperialist. And her sister is a suffragist but becomes very pro-imperialism when her son is appointed he has a job for the government in the Philippines. So I think that, and I can't say that much like what the politics of Unitarianism were around suffrage, I'm just not sure, but I think she is out of step with the women closest to her on the issue of suffrage, with her sister and her mother and Louisa May Alcott. Louisa May Alcott, they're close throughout their whole lives, but Louisa May Alcott is furious because when Ellen refuses to vote in sort of local elections when women who own property are allowed to, Louisa May Alcott said she's draining away other people. She's so influential. People respect her so much in Concord. If she's not going to vote, other women are saying they're not going to vote. So I think it's both important to realize that her politics are complicated. She was conservative on some issues and not on others. But I do think it is a path of resistance to her a little bit. I mean, I think she both sort of internalized how important caregiving was to women, because that was the role that her family gave her. And I think she also did see particularly she's so stubborn about suffrage that I think it was a way to carve out her own path. So it doesn't quite answer your question, but.
Anyone else?
Thank you, Kate, for this great discussion. Through your research, what are some of the insights you gained into Lydian?
The Emerson, they're all complicated. Lydian, she's so smart, and she just does not want to be a housewife, I don't think. I mean, I think that is she says that when Ralph Waldo Emerson proposes to her, like, I don't know if I'm going to be getting, she's older by the standards of the time. She'd already sort of announced to her brother, like, I'm going to be an old maid, and I'm really enjoying this life. So I think, and I've just been reading some letters by Sarah Freeman Clark, and it's really interesting to read those letters because they are, some of the ones that I were reading were, it's before Ellen and Edith are born, so I'm seeing all of these people I know as sort of middle-aged people, parents being young people, and sort of to see the way that people react to Lydian as just this sort of like intellectual fire in her. So I think she is incredibly smart, and I think she's incredibly like loving to her children in some ways, but I also feel like having read so much about her from the perspective of her daughters, she's a difficult person to have as your mother. Like, I think, they do spend a lot of time taking care of her, and she is quite demanding on that front. And so and one thing I think is interesting about when Ellen writes that biography of her mother, which is still really like the best biography of Lydian, someone needs to tackle her, I can see Ellen almost like in real time reevaluating her mother. Like, now that it's after her mother's died and she doesn't have that burden of caregiving with her anymore, she can see how smart her mother was and see the way other people reacted to her. So she always respected her mother, but I think it was a sort of exhausting situation. But one thing she does say about her mother was like, Lydian loved to be read to, and often that was the caregiving that she wanted. And Ellen is like, well, she basically says, like, we all got really well read. like we learned so much because what she wanted to do was have us read to her. And so because of that, and she did really respect her daughter's intelligence, but she also wanted a caregiver. So she's, I think she's fascinating. And it's been really interesting to read more about her when she was young, and sort of see how she negotiated, what was really a transformation in her life. And she never got over moving to Concord. It's like on her tombstone, like she loved going back to Plymouth, and that's where I think she felt at home. I think she liked the ocean, so.
Question back here.
So I find it curious, though, with her position on women's suffrage, and wondered if she was the first. As a member of the WPA, we always say, well, Ellen Emerson was the first elected official in the town, woman elected to the school committee.
Yeah.
And was that not a political position?
Yeah, that is one way in which she is complicated. Like, she doesn't seem to have any qualms about taking that position. And I think, and she's not alone in this, I think there are many sort of anti-suffragist women or women who would be concerned about women having like other political roles, think because it's for children, like because it is for school, which is about caring for children, it is just sort of an expansion of women's sphere in a way that they can live with. But it's certainly like a huge contradiction, and I don't see her wrestling with that in her letter. She loves getting on that committee, and she was like, at first she's like, I'm going to be quiet till I know everything, till I understand everything, and then she's like, oh, I can't stay quiet. Like she takes it, she loves it, she's very serious about it. But like later on, after her parents have died, I think it's the New England Women's Club wants to publish a picture of both one of Waldo, and one of her. And Ellen's like, oh, we can't publish a picture of our mother. She's a private person. And Edith actually writes this long defense of why they should publish the picture, and like why the biographies that exist should have more about Lydian, and how important she was to her husband's career and thinking. And Ellen lets them publish the picture. But it's just she does not seem to see it as a contradiction, and it so clearly seems to be a contradiction to us, or to me.
She was large. She contained multitudes.
She did contain multitudes.
Hi. I first want to thank you for, I feel like every time I hear you speaking, you give us more little details about Ellen's personality. And I really loved that you brought up joy,
Yeah.
right? Where you're like, yes, like getting together in community and like the line about the conference or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
it was fabulous. So I'm in love with this picture of her at Walden. Can you, I don't know what your research is, and I'm totally springing this on you. Do you have any other anecdotes about her either at Walden or about if she wanted the Walden to be for the public's use, or do you have any?
Yeah, I think she probably would have wanted Walden to be for the public's use. That it's really Edith who masterminds that, and Ellen had died long before. But she did. I'm trying to think of I don't know if I have a specific anecdote on the top of my head. They would go to picnics at Walden. They would also go to picnics on the river. Like they would fill the boats up and have picnics on the river. So I do think she, and she, of course, she rode the donkey. She rode her beloved donkey to Walden. Yeah, yeah. She didn't ride it from the Azores, but yes, the donkey, like her friend Clara Dabney, was from the Azores. And there is and I don't have the quote in front of me, but when she first gets the donkey, she rides it out to Walden and the cliffs, and she just talks. It's actually one of her sort of most transcendental-esque piece of nature writing, where she just talks about the being calm, the quiet and calm, and being sort of at one with the donkey, and sort of moving through space on a different pace. So I think it was. And of course, they would go on these Sunday walks when, really, as long as he can walk, she and her father, when they're growing up at Sunday at 4, the religious training is over and their father takes them on a walk. And I think that's his version of the religious training. And so I think they go, Walden was one of the places they would walk during that time. So it's really just always part of her life, I think.
And for much of her life, there was an amusement park
Yeah.
at Walden Pond,
Yeah.
so it wasn't all that quiet.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm wondering what she had against suffrage.
I think she like many of the women of her class and race who were anti-suffrage, they felt like women were going to lose prestige if they just had the right to vote. They were going to lose sort of a protected status that they had. Many of the women who felt that way, like Ellen, had associations with powerful men, or men who were culturally important, financially important, and they influenced those people's ideas. And she just does not seem to be able to see her way around it. That very idea is that, because she loves April 19th so much. They celebrate it. That's not just a every 50-year event in the Emerson house. And she loves the centennial, when Louisa May Alcott is writing a protest about the way women are treated in it. I think she felt like it was going to ultimately harm women and harm their status in society. And I think it's very hard for us to get our heads around, because it just seems the logic of it is just not there for us as 21st century people. But she was not alone in that thinking. And there were a lot of women from sort of prominent families in Boston who were anti-suffragists, who she wasn't necessarily her social circle, but she would have known them, she would have known their ideas. And like I said, she's thrilled when the anti-suffragist comes to talk to the parish association. And her sister, Edith, is like, do not talk about anti-suffrage when people come to the house. Because there's an endless pilgrimage, people just coming to visit. And she's like, do not lend them the weight of the Emerson name. Do not lend your views. The least you can do is be quiet if you can't believe in suffrage.
Hi.
Where?
From the point of view of the Orchard House, of course, Louisa is a suffragist, totally dedicated in every way, whether in her novels like Work, where she talks about what she went through, even in Little Women.
Yeah.
And she was on board with and very much in front of a lot of these movements. I mean, the idea that women need to be, you know, she and her mother raised them to believe that women should be full partners in life on the outside world, not just in the home. So could you, anything that you can tell us, illuminate us around her relationship? Because of course, as you note, the Emersons and the Alcotts were very good friends, and they grew up together, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, they grew up together, and then the Alcotts were sort of early teachers as well, because they're just a little bit older. Louisa May Alcott dedicates her first book, Flower Fables, to Ellen, and then she dedicates one of her last books. I think it's the second volume of Lulu's Library. She writes her, Louisa May Alcott writes her publisher, like right as it's going to press, like, is it too late? Is it too late to get this dedication in there? And I was happy to read this too, because they, you know, there aren't very many letters between them that exist. Partly, sometimes they're near each other. You know, there's just not that many letters between them. And Ellen gets her copy of Little Women when she's in the Azores, but unfortunately, she does not. She gives it to the Dabney children to read first, and so I don't know her opinion of it. And a lot of the Azores letters burned in the fire. But I was really glad to see that dedication, because I knew the tension over suffrage, and because there isn't that much documentation of them writing each other later in life, and I don't have the dedication right in front of me, but it is like, it's just like to one who is, it's like we knew fairies existed. It's like to one who always believed in the good fairies. We both now know that the good fairies, you're basically saying the good fairies are the women who do the work. So she writes this, and she's like to one who's never grows old and who's always loved by her community. So there was still a strong thread of connection between them at the end of Louisa May Alcott's life. She still felt very fondly towards her, despite this, you know, pretty angry letter she writes to Edna Dow Cheney about how angry she is over the suffrage issue.
We have another question from the Zoom chat.
Oh.
So this attendee says, thank you so much for this interesting talk. Could Professor Culkin speak to the role transcendentalism played in Ellen's childhood? And why did Unitarianism appeal to her? And were there things about transcendentalism that Ellen walked away from or kept as the Unitarian Church played a bigger part in her life and place in the Concord community?
That's a good question. I think she probably is. I think one thing that happens in Ellen's life is, as famously, her older brother dies when she's almost 3. And I think she says this in her biography of her mother, that Margaret Fuller believed the wrong child survived. And I don't know if Margaret Fuller I don't know where she got that message. But I also think it was easy to get that message from her father as well. I don't think he ever explicitly said that, but his grief is so deep. But there's a letter and Lydian's as well. But there was like a letter from Lydian was like, you have to remember, like, Ellen. You have to appreciate Ellen. So I think, and you know, again, it's just a culture already where a boy would be more valued than a girl, an older child would be more valued than a younger child. All of that is going, you know, message, and she's 3, and she's a very smart 3-year-old. You know, she's a very observant 3-year-old. So I think she's absorbed something of that. And then when she is, 14 or 15, her father's like, you have to come home, you have to leave the Sedgwick School, which she had really started to love, and take care of the house because your mother can't do it right now. And, you know, she went back to school. She was very well educated. But I think that message of, like, the way you can serve this family and the way you can prove your worth to this family is through caregiving. And so I think, I mean, the transcendentalists aren't really about caregiving in some ways, you know, like about sort of sacrificing yourself to taking care of other people. And, you know, Waldo gives her The Angel in the House. That's why she loves the book. Her father gives it to her when she's a teenager and tells her she should read it. So, you know, she's getting that messaging just from the broader culture and then, you know, from the family. So I think within the Unitarian Church, she is finding a community in which like as I said, I think it's very important to realize, like, it is an intellectual community for her. She is finding it stimulating in that way, but she is also finding a way that her vision of what is valuable about her is reinforced. And then I think there was also the fact that, I don't know if anyone's read Lydian's Transcendental Bible, where, Lydian bore the brunt of taking care of people who, as people sort of track through the house, and writes this sort of scathing, condemnation. It's funny, but it's also angry about, these are people who don't think about other people. Like, these are people who think only their own ideas are important and don't notice and are incapable of caring for others fully. I mean, that's sort of the end message you might get from the Transcendental Bible. So I think, so she knew, and that's the way her mother talked about transcendentalism to some extent, or the extremes of it, the hypocrisy that she saw in that. So I think that was also part of it. So I think there's a lot of factors, but I think that, it's a really good question, but I think all of those things sort of factored into this being a place that she would, she'd be intellectually engaged, she would have a community. The work that her family had basically laid out for her would be supported here and celebrated, but also did give her a way to have a sort of separation from her family too. So.
Well, thank you, and thank you all. You some very thought-provoking questions and some very thought-provoking answers. And we can continue our conversations downstairs at the reception. The reception is in the parish hall. Many of you know how to get there. For those of you who don't, go through that door and down the stairs, take a hairpin right, and it's going to be right ahead of you. If you would like to use an elevator, if you go through this door and before you get to the stairs, turn right and go through a door, you will see an elevator on your left. And just press the down button, that'll take you right down to the parish hall. So I thank you all for coming out tonight, and let's go have some cookies and cider.
And toast Ellen's birthday.